If you turn toward the west, look up in the sky, you will know you're here in my heart, even though we're far apart tonight. Hey, my name is Bruce Gerrish. I'm originally from the States. I've been in Canada now for many years. I grew up in Minneapolis, and I've predominantly been on the West Coast. I mean, exclusively on the West Coast, Vancouver, Kelowna. I live on the island. This is my second time living on the island. I'm kind of a roots-styled musician and singer-songwriter, and I've played for years all over everywhere. And these days, of course, with COVID, there's not a whole lot of places, but we are playing. I'm still playing a gig that I used to do over in Vancouver at the Sylvia. I still do that fairly regularly, and I have become the artistic director for the Islands Folk Festival as well. So that's been another gig that I've been doing. And we have a studio here. I have a studio with John Ellis, and we're in the midst of finishing off all the renovations here and that sort of stuff. And I live in Nanaimo. And it's been great actually coming back to the island, being back on the island again. There's a lot of great musicians and writers and artists of all sort here. And it's a nice escape the big city and be back in Nanaimo. Although Nanaimo's, fairly busy too these days, but especially if you're taking the highway. But that's a little bit of my background. What drew me to music originally, I started playing when I was 7 or 8. What originally drew me to music rather, is it was around Christmas time, and being 7 or 8, I was looking around for presents, and I looked under my parents' bed, and I saw this big case, and I pulled it out, and I opened it up, and it was a guitar. And I thought, oh my God, they're getting me a guitar for Christmas. And so I was all excited. When nobody's around, I'd go in and play it, and didn't know what to play. I just, kind of just strummed the strings. And so eventually Christmas Day came around, and I was all excited. And then, my mother came out with the guitar Christmas morning. It was for my father. I was heartbroken. But luckily, my father never played it anyway. And so, I played it. And that's kind of what I first got into it. And I actually first, I took a few lessons, but I kind of taught myself, as many people do, play guitar. And I actually started writing songs early on. When I was like 7, 8 years old, I would kind of make up my own little song, and because I didn't know any covers at that time. So that's kind of what started me out in the music business at about age 7 or maybe 8. So how my professional, if that's what you can call it, career started out, I had moved to California, and I lived in Southern California for a while. And I then moved to San Francisco, and in those days, the busking scene on the streets in San Francisco were really, really amazing, and there were like a lot of really super good people on the place. And we started playing. I grew up playing because a friend of mine's father was a jazz player, and we kind of played old jazz. And we used to play in front of Macy's right in Union Square, if you've been to San Francisco, and they let us play there. That was our spot. Anyway, that was my sort of first step. From there, I started playing little places in San Francisco, little bars, and I worked in a music nightclub that was kind of like the Commodore in Vancouver, and that was cool. And so, met a bunch of people, and just continued to play from there, and started playing gigs here and there, and some with band, and some as a solo, some with a duo, and here I am years later doing the same thing. It depends on who's available to play. I play right now. I play with fellow Colin Stevenson, and he and I have been playing, and John Ellis is actually going to play too, which we're excited about, because John's a fabulous multi-instrumentalist, and does great harmonies too. So the group that I have had in the past, and I have a couple of CDs out, that if nobody does any CDs anymore, but a couple of records, I guess. And it was called the Shinolas, and I had a group in Vancouver, and we still go back and play with the Shinolas occasionally, but we are reforming another sort of more strictly acoustic version of the Shinolas, and that's what Colin and I are doing, and John Ellis is going to be involved too, so that'll be a lot of fun. We've done a few things around town, did a couple of house concerts and things like that, and so it's been fun. And we're kind of revived it and reinvented it so for the island. So that's the Shinolas. I also will play solo and do that sort of thing as well. And I had a long, crazy way I got into Canada from the U.S. I'm now American-Canadian, but at that time I was just American. So I sailed up on a sailboat that I knew people had, and we sailed all the way up the coast from California. And I met a Canadian girl there on the boat, and so we ended up getting together, and we got off the boat in Vancouver, and we traveled in. She was originally from Kelowna. We traveled into Kelowna, and we decided we're having so much fun we didn't go back on the boat, back down to California, so we stayed here. And one thing led to another. We lived in Whistler for a while. She became pregnant, and I was still illegal. So it was a kind of a funny story about how that happened. So I had to go to an Canadian immigration officer that was near Whistler, and he was a real kind of brush cut guy, and kind of a hard-nosed sort of military guy, and so he said, okay, well, and then Kathy was pregnant, so with my son, and then so he said, okay, well, we can get you in here, but you can't work while you're in Canada. So, so I said, oh, okay. Of course, we had no money at that time, and an illegal broke musician from the U.S. Anyway, long story short, I had to go and meet him once in a while, so I started calling myself Alias, and I played with another guy that was named Willie Ward, and his last name was Ward, so we had a group called Alias and Ward, so I didn't have to put my name in it. And then I went for my monthly meeting with the guy working on the immigration, and he pulls out the newspaper and he says, "Who's Alias and Ward? That looks like you." So yeah, he pretty well had me busted, and he said, I could send you back below the border for this, and I'd already been going kind of back and forth and that sort of thing, and so finally, he's all mad at me, and then finally he says, "So what kind of music do you play?" And I said, "Oh, well, I can play jazz, I can play blues." He says, "Oh yeah, well, I play blues piano." And so suddenly, it was like I was okay, and he, kind of shuffled in. He decided I was okay. He shuffled his desk a little bit, pulled out a piece of paper, and said, "Sign this." And I did, and that was it. I was in. I was at that time they used to call it landed immigrants, but now they call them permanent residents when you first come here. But obviously I went through the years. And things changed, and I've been here ever since. Have a couple kids here. Didn't stay with the same woman that came, but we're still friends and everything. So that's my story about basically how I originally got into Canada, kind of by accident, actually. I didn't drop the Dodge or anything. I just kind of by accident via a sailboat, but that's what that was. Well, with regard to gigs in Canada versus the U.S., I will say, number one, that it's always a difficult scenario, no matter where you are, where you live, or whatever. It's equally as hard. It's not any better there. There perhaps are more gigs there because maybe it's bigger. I mean, there's more gigs in Toronto versus than Nanaimo because there's more people, right? So that kind of goes hand in hand, although surprisingly not so much in Vancouver these days. But I think that some of the differences are, at least were, when I first came to Canada years ago, I remember going to pubs and playing, and there just wasn't the tradition of live music in Western Canada anyway, as much. Maybe in Vancouver there was, but I wasn't in Vancouver, and I remember, playing a good set somewhere, and it was like there would be no response at all. And so I thought, and I will say that earlier on, Americans will respond. If they don't like you, they'll let you know, and if they like you, they'll let you know. And I was very difficult at first to get used to maybe it was just a little more conservative, or that British Reserve or whatever in here, but people wouldn't respond. And I remember finishing a set and walking through the bar, and somebody said, "Oh, you were just fantastic," and I said, "Oh, I would never have known," But I've seen that change through the years, and I think now as it's evolved, and I think more younger population got into music, that I think it's all pretty good everywhere these days. People are pretty responsive. People are into music everywhere. So regarding pay, I don't think pay was any better in the States than it was here. There maybe were just more places to play, so you could maybe make your way a little bit better than being sort of in an area where there weren't as many gigs. That's really what it came down to. But I think you make your own way, and you figure out other scenarios, like what Laura's doing. I'll say this, Laura's a fantastic singer and a songwriter in her own regard, and there she is behind the camera doing all this stuff. So I think you learn to do, and I do the same thing, I think you learn to do things that are sort of associated with it quite often, and you just make your way as best you can. There's no simple, easy path wherever you are or wherever you live. This is a song that has a U.S.-Canadian connection, and one year my brother was living in Europe, and he was from Chicago, and he said, "Look, I've got a car I can give you. If you come back, you can drive it back." And he said it was a Nissan. It was about a 1986 Nissan compact. So I came back one Christmas, and he gave it to me, and it was the dead of winter, and so we drove it back across North Dakota, Montana. This is the northern route that goes across and ultimately ends up in Seattle. So it was horrendously cold. And I didn't know what these little plugs were that were sticking out the front, and it turned out it was a block heater, which I didn't even know at the time. And anyway, so we were heading out into going across North Dakota at night, and a cop stops us, and he says, "Are you sure you want to go out there tonight?" And he says, "Well, first of all, you got to put cardboard in front of your radiator if you're going out, so it saves heat and it's not going to freeze things." So he actually went with us to a 7-Eleven or something, got some cardboard and put it in for us. We took off across the country in the night, and first thing we noticed is that we got to the border of Montana and North Dakota, and we saw this restaurant was the 4Bs, and the 4Bs was apparently a chain restaurant that went from North Dakota to across Montana, and then there was a trucker in there, and it was nighttime, and we were warming up and having coffee or hot chocolate or something, and he said, "Well, what does this 4B stand for?" And he said, "Oh, well, that's the route. All the truckers call it the 4Bs because it goes from Bismarck to Billings to Bozeman to Butte." And okay. And then as we had this epic journey across the snow and the tundra and the freezing, I wrote this song. It's called Montana Man. Bismarck, Billings, Bozeman, Butte, Interstate's her only route. How could she have been so blind? She just gotta get back to a man in time. She swears it's not too late by the time she crossed the state to get back to her sweet Montana man. When she left home in Missoula, it was springtime. We told her that it'd never leave Big Sky. So she headed off to Bozeman on the highway that she'd chosen. But by Billings she began to wonder why. But she took that job in Bismarck, she was headstrong, trying to make a little something of her life. Soon to run off to Timbuktu instead of just making do, winding up another lonesome cowboy wife. He's driving them 4Bs back to the honey, back to a sweet Montana man. She swears it's not too late by the time she crosses the state to get back to a sweet Montana man. I guess you don't know what you got until you go. Big city life seems colder than this driving slow. Another 100 miles to beat, she knows there ain't no substitute for a sweet Montana man. She'd drive them 4Bs back to the honey, back to a sweet Montana man. And she swears it's not too late by the time she crossed that state to get back to a sweet Montana man. A Bismarck, Billings, Bozeman, Butte. A Bismarck, Billings, Bozeman, Butte. Bismarck, Billings, Bozeman, Butte. Bismarck, Billings, Bozeman, Butte. So that was the story of the 4Bs. Okay, here's another song that has a little story to it. I used to live in the West End in Vancouver, right next to Stanley Park. It was awesome. And I would ride my bike around the whole circle there. If you've been there in Vancouver, likely you've ridden a bike around there too. And so every day I'd go by, and I would always see, is right down by the totems, there was this plaque that said Hallelujah Point. And I thought, well, that's kind of curious. And finally one day I Googled it, and it turned out that in the late 1800s, this is where the Salvation Army sisters would go down and on Sunday afternoons, and they would sing hymns, and they would try to convert all the heathens who lived in the park. And this is like, late 1800s, and ironically, that all the heathens are still there, including me, and so that was what the Hallelujah Point was named after. And then it's also, I found out after going out on somebody's boat from Cole Harbor there, that it's a point of navigation when you're on a boat. It's rounding Hallelujah Point, that sort of thing. So I thought about it for a while as I rode my bike around there, and I finally ended up writing this song about it. It's called the Hallelujah Point. Out here on the edge of the world, the wind likes to knock you around, and there's a southwesterly building, north shoots are coming down. It's out on the sound, it's starting to clock around, and there's a big swell rising out on the blue horizon, blowing right past that Hallelujah Point. Blowing right past that Hallelujah Point. My sister Magdalene leads the choir, and they're sounding like angels from above. And they come over here every Sunday afternoon to think about the glory of His love. Clapping their hands and shaking the tambourine and trying to save all the sinners down here like me. I'm praising the Lord on that hallelujah point. I'm praising the Lord on that hallelujah point. Sometimes I think this working life, hey, just ain't for me. 'Cause I'd rather be out tossing in the wind than a prisoner living in city.